Welcome to Common Sense Care, Parenting Gender-Confused Children with Truth and Love, brought to you by Partners for Ethical Care. The gender industry's so-called affirmative care model is their one-size-fits-all answer for everyone who struggles with their sense of identity. But in no other area of medicine, education, or psychology is a one-size-fits-all treatment plan the best thing for every person. At Partners for Ethical Care, we believe that every child is an individual and deserves the treatment that's most appropriate for him or her. So welcome back. I'm Maria Keffler.
And I'm Erin Brewer. And what are we talking about today, Maria?
We're going to talk about whether social transition is really harmless.
Okay.
And I think that there's a lot we can say about this and a lot of different aspects we can cover. So we're just going to talk about what we think about that.
Yeah, and this is a tough issue because I know there are a lot of people who will say, you know, we don't want medical transitioning, but if a kid wants to socially transition, we're okay with that. I think that we need to push back on that a little bit. And the reason is that essentially socially transitioning is telling a child that you're accepting that they're born in the wrong body and that there's something flawed about them, and that being the opposite sex will somehow improve their lives. And I think that's a really negative message to send to any child.
Well, and we should probably talk first about what social transitioning actually is. What does it mean?
Exactly. And I think it's so important to differentiate between a child who wants to be gender nonconforming versus a child who's socially transitioning. Do you want to talk about that for a sec?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we think of social transitioning as trying to pass as the opposite sex, trying to make other people think that if you're a girl, think you're actually a boy, or vice versa. And this usually revolves around a haircut, clothing styles, trying to appropriate some of those opposite sex role stereotypes. And I've heard parents address this with kids. I like what you said about there's a difference between being gender nonconforming and being socially transitioned. One parent that I know of said to her daughter, there are people like Annie Lennox, the singer, and Diane Keaton, the actress, who are very gender nonconforming. They both wear very masculine, typically masculine type clothes, suits, ties, haircut. Annie Lennox has very, very short cropped hair. But those women are not trying to deceive anyone. They're not trying to make anyone think that they're men. They're just women who have a particular style that tends to be masculine-ish. And so I think we would call that gender nonconforming. Or Boy George, the singer. He loves to wear flamboyant, gaudy clothes and dresses and makeup and all that. And he said directly, I'm not trying to pretend I'm a woman. I'm a man. I'm always going to be a man. So that would be the difference, I think, between gender nonconforming and socially transition, and whether you're trying to deceive someone about who you really are.
And I think one of the important differences is the name and pronouns. And so somebody who socially transitions will kind of insist on others outside them using different pronouns than the ones they would typically use, and often get very upset if they're not able to control that. And the other thing is the dead name, and just the listen to that the dead name. That's a name that basically you're saying is that person is dead. I am a new person. Anytime we encourage a child to think of themselves as dead and recreating themselves to be a new person, that's really suggesting to them that they appropriate an unhealthy coping mechanism. And so I think that those are really important considerations, that if a kid just wants to dress differently, if a girl wants a short haircut or if a boy wants long hair, that's not in any way suggesting that they're uncomfortable with who they are. But if they're insisting on others using opposite sex pronouns, and if they're calling their given birth name their dead name, that's indicative of some deep down discomfort with who they are. And encouraging them to become a different person is not an appropriate way to handle that.
We've talked about that term dead name before. And one of the things kids will say is, oh, I've always been this way. I've always known I was the opposite sex. But then employing that term dead name really undercuts that argument, because they're also saying, oh, that person you knew before is dead and I'm a new person, but I'm the same person I've always been. It really doesn't make
Very
sense.
complicated. And one of the things, I mean, this is something that's very close to home to me, because when I started first grade, I was adamant that I was a boy. I wanted the teachers to treat me like a boy. I wanted the other kids to treat me like a boy. And I feel like I was saved by teachers and other important adults in my life who refused to accept that I was a boy. They continued to enforce reality on me in a way that was very important. And I just, one of the reasons that I got involved in this is because it just fills me with horror to think about what would have happened to me if I had had other adults saying, oh, you are a boy. We're going to accept you as a boy. You're going to start using the boys' bathroom. We're going to call you by your chosen name. All these things. It really would have reinforced all the self-hatred that I had, reinforced that desire to just ditch Erin, basically kill Erin and become a different person. And we know that those are the kinds of behaviors that lead to continued mental health issues. It's never healthy to encourage a child to basically disassociate from themselves. And we wanted to talk about, there's kind of two different kinds of reasons that a child might want to socially transition. One of them is that dissociative disorder, really, where, in my case, it wasn't that I was pretending to be a boy or I was acting like a boy. It's that I had dissociated from myself and decided I was a boy. There was no pretending there. It was, in my mind, I was a boy now. And kids can do that. They have magical thinking.
Yeah.
And they're able to do stuff like that. They're coping mechanisms. And so if I had had people around me reinforcing that delusion that I was in fact something I wasn't, that would have been really harmful to me. So there's that, that kid who has some pretty significant mental health issues, who really needs help. And if you encourage them to disassociate and become something they're not even going to get the help they need to identify the underlying cause of that dissociation. And the other is what we talked about as LARPing, which is live action role playing. And these are kids who don't have this, deep down, gender dysphoria where they have just kind of ditched themselves and become somebody else. These are kids who are basically role playing. They've decided they want to be the opposite sex for whatever reason. And they've sort of immersed themselves in a character. I'm not sure if it's a caricature or a character.
I think both words could apply. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're very different. But ultimately, the harm from them is the same. If you have a kid who's dissociated and you're encouraging them to in that delusion, that's going to be dangerous. If you have a kid who's role playing, and you start treating them as if they're that role play character, that's going to end up being harmful because the kid isn't going to really learn how to deal with life as themselves. They're going to have this alternative persona that they use to interact with other people and to navigate through life.
Well, we've seen that, I think, with some other role-playing games. I know Dungeons and Dragons has always been very popular. And I remember even when I was younger, I had friends who played it. And there were some people who got so deep into those roles that they really couldn't get out of them. That was who they thought their real persona was. And I think that's one of the dangers with live action role playing. Almost everything has good sides and bad sides, right? And you can go too far one way or the other. Certainly not saying live action role playing is bad. But if you get too deep into it, too invested in the character that you forget who you really are, that can be a problem. And I think we're seeing that happening with a lot of kids who are being sort of drawn into this via social media, via school. Partners for Ethical Care just put out a little vignette yesterday that was taken from The Witness, episode 17, interviewing a 16-year-old sister. And this girl talked about how she was systematically drawn into this in middle school by people saying, do you agree with the trans, with trans or not? Do you support trans? And when she said no, she was called names and she was drawn into it. But in that video, she said, I had a moment where I decided I'm going to be a boy. She said, I clearly remember deciding that
And
I'm going to be a boy.
yeah, I think that's happening more and more as kids are, feeling this incredible pressure to be somewhere in the LGBTQ community. That they don't get to be part of this fun group unless they have that identity. And I think more and more kids are just sort of succumbing to it. I just listened to an interview with Abigail Schreier, and she was talking about a whistleblower who she interviewed, who worked at Planned Parenthood, and said that groups of girls would come in asking for testosterone, and they'd be in the waiting room giggling and laughing and having a good time. That is not gender dysphoria. Those are kids who are not suffering from gender dysphoria. A kid who's suffering from gender dysphoria is, in deep angst, incredible self-hatred, depression, anxiety, dissociation. It's not a kid who's in the waiting room giggling with friends. And so the fact that we've got, groups of girls coming in and they're doing it almost as like a social activity, really indicates more of that LARPing, that live action role playing. Unfortunately, for those who've done live action role playing, at the end of the role play, you sort of take on your own self. You reassert yourself. Unfortunately, we don't have an ending for this, and so these kids are getting involved in it, and there isn't a dungeon master or somebody who's controlling the role play that's saying, okay, now we're done with the role play. Now you need to be yourself again. We have a short video that sort of explains role playing for those who are unfamiliar with the whole concept. So let's watch that, and then we can talk about it a little bit more.
Okay.
LARP stands for Live Action Role Playing Game. Apparently the G is silent. And according to interactive game researchers Falk and Davenport, it can be defined as a dramatic and narrative game form that takes place in a physical environment. It is a storytelling system in which players assume character roles that they portray in person through action and interaction. The game world is an agreed upon environment located in both space and time and governed by a set of rules, some of which must be formal and quantifiable. Now when you think of LARPing, maybe you conjure up an image of a group of nerds wearing homemade costumes, sporting foam weapons, and casting spells on each other in the park. And yes, LARPing is something that many self-proclaimed nerds do love, but it is also enjoyed by lots of other people all over the world. The 2014 LARP census, yes, that is a real thing, documented participation in over 80 countries. But LARPing is more than just a game. It's a game that merges performance, community, and art. It allows you to immerse yourself in the game by literally taking on the role of your character. LARP is especially interesting from a psychological standpoint. As Lizzie Stark writes, the yearning to experience personal emotion is one of the hallmarks of the LARP movement today. Many LARPers want to experience emotions, the loss of a friend, the thrill of battle, the pain of betrayal that they would never have occasion to feel in everyday life.
Well, that's interesting. I've never done live action role playing to that degree. I guess I did a murder mystery dinner one time, which would be considered live action role playing. That was a lot of fun, but it was limited to one evening.
Yeah, and I've done a couple. I actually, when I was in college, I was a paid victim for EMT scenarios. And so,
oh my gosh.
So I would be given, here are your symptoms, here's your role, and I would spend the day, and it was usually for a mass casualty incident. And so I had that experience. And the other was being part of the Society for Creative Anachronism when I was in college. And that's a group that likes, they do role playing, and I didn't get super involved, but boy, was it fun, Maria. We'd put on our costumes and we'd go and we'd have a ball. And, everybody would be interacting as if they were this other character. And it was so much fun. But then we'd go home and we'd take off our costume and we would, move along in life as ourselves. And I could see it being very attractive to sort of just be like, I'm going to stay in character. That was a lot of fun.
I would rather be a medieval princess for the rest of my life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you could do in, when you do live action role play, especially some of them now that are, very creative, is that you can be from a different world. You can be a different creature. You don't have to be human. You can be male or female. You can, you can go in and just sort of immerse yourself. And I like in that video how he talks about that role playing can give you the opportunity to sort of imagine what it feels like to be somebody else. And that sounds so familiar. The problem is that people who are doing live action role playing and insisting that they're the opposite sex, they think they know what it's like to be the opposite sex, but they really don't. And that's one of the problems with social transition, is that you're giving a child the impression that they can become the opposite sex. And we know that they can't. And so you're giving them this false reality that can be really harmful.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'm thinking about some of these adult men who are claiming to be women and saying that I'm a real woman, I've always been a woman, but they have not had the experiences that real women have had.
Right.
And
we really don't know. I mean, I can insist that I'm Chinese. And, I've always felt Chinese. I love Chinese food. I like to dress in Chinese clothes. But I'm not, I'm just not.
Yeah.
And so no matter how much I might feel like I am, I'm not. And that's where I think the social transition is so dangerous, is that it gives the kid the impression that they actually can feel what it's like to be something that they're not, that they can be something that they're not. And children need boundaries. That's something that's really important for them, is to have those boundaries, so that they grow up really having a good sense of what reality is. We've heard stories of kids who are pretending to be Superman, and they jump off a roof and break their leg. These things happen because kids get in that imaginative play, and they have that magical thinking, and so they don't understand the difference between pretend and real. So if you start allowing them to be treated as if something that isn't true is true, it could be really damaging, not just to them, but to their peers.
And we also find that most kids who socially transition try to move into medical transition. It's not, I hate to use the tried old term slippery slope, but it really is a slippery slope, that once they socially transition, they find that doesn't quite satisfy. And so, well, let's try the medical transition. And then that doesn't quite satisfy. So let's do the surgical transition. It doesn't stop. It's not a satisfying experience.
Well, and part of that, I think, is because these kids are told that all their problems are going to go away and they're going to feel so much better if they socially transition. So they socially transition, they don't feel that much better, but now they're in this role. And I've talked to detransitioners. It's incredibly difficult to come out and say, I think I made a mistake. So instead of accepting that maybe they made a mistake, they pursue the medical transition. And, maybe they'll get on puberty blockers and they're like, this isn't really helping either. So then they go on the hormones. Well, that's not really helping either. And it just keeps entrenching them further and further into this role. And it makes it harder and harder for them to, first of all, say, I think I made a mistake. And also to look at the reasons why it was so seductive to take on that role.
I just heard a term yesterday in a parenting group, which horrified me. And it's the first time I've heard this, but this mom talked about her child talking about his gender guide. No, I'm sorry, transition guide. So, we know that there are social media influencers. We know there are these glitter moms, which are generally adult men pretending to be women, who are luring kids. But now there's apparently a transition guide who will help you. And the transition guide, of course, told this 15-year-old to cut his parents off and come live with the transition guide. But what you said about when you dig a hole and you keep digging it deeper and deeper and deeper, it's harder and harder to get out of it.
Especially when you're affirmed for it, especially when everybody's celebrating it. So a lot of these kids were kind of just nobody when they were in high school. And then all of a sudden even elementary school, I see these kids who, oh my gosh, there's one kid, and I can't remember exactly what the name was, but this kid was, fairly young, 4 or 5, I think, socially transitioned. And for some reason, the Obama administration flew him out to the Capitol to watch Star Wars and meet some of the Star Wars characters. This kid got treated like a celebrity simply for socially transitioning. And I hear stories over and over of kids who are sort of, not the most popular kids. They're kind of marginal. And then they come out as transgender, and suddenly they are the most popular kids in school. So it's not just admitting that you're wrong. It's also having to deal with this social force that's saying you're good if you're transgender, you're bad if you're not.
Yeah, I think we really do need to dig in on biological reality. We need to dig in on truth. And I think it was Colin Wright who said, this is reality's last stand. We cannot afford to lose our tether to reality because we're going to descend into chaos. That's a paraphrase. That's not exactly how he said it. But I think it's so true. And these kids, especially these young kids, who maybe are just role playing, because that's what small children do. That's part of being a small child. Today I'm a cowboy. Today I'm an astronaut. Today I'm a princess. And it's good to let kids explore those things and sort of humor them in it. But at the end of the day, that child needs to know, no, you're actually a 7-year-old boy. You're actually my 6-year-old daughter. And now it's time to go to bed and be a daughter.
Right.
Because they need a foundation in reality. They need to know what truth is.
And I remember in school, and I think it was in probably kindergarten, we'd have sort of a playtime where we would all play, and then the teacher would say, okay, time to come back to school. And it's time to come back to reality. And I see that in parents do that with their kids all the time. They'll be playing and having a great time and imagining all kinds of amazing adventures. And then the parents say, okay, come on, it's time to come back, basically.
Yeah.
Now we have parents oftentimes who are saying, not only go ahead and play, but I'm going to enter into that fictional world with you and reinforce it. And the teachers are going to do it, and the crossing guard's going to do it, and the lunch person's going to do it. And we, instead of having somebody who creates those important boundaries, the kid is the one. And that's, to me, just incredibly concerning. One of the things the guy talks about in that LARPing video, and I'd encourage people to go watch the whole thing, is that there are designated people to create the environment for LARPing. So they create the roles, they create the rules, and at the end, they're the ones who stop it. And sometimes there's even a debrief afterwards, because people need that transition in order to go from, role playing to back to themselves. Well, when it comes to social transition, basically what you're doing is you're putting the kid in that role. You're telling the kid they get to create their own rules, they get to create their own characters, and they get to make people on the outside conform to what they want them to do. That's too much power for a child. That's incredibly dangerous for a child.
Yeah, what if it were like that with the Society for Creative Anachronism, which reinvents medieval times? What if instead of being confined to that ballroom or to that campground, suddenly they were all coming out into society, and we have to affirm that he is actually a medieval knight, and he wants to joust with me because I've offended him, so I must joust with him.
Yes, and call him Sir James, and do all the gesticulations to show deference to the king. We have Star Trekkies, who might want to walk around and pretend like they're in that world, and it could get incredibly crazy.
Well, it is getting,
and that's what I see happening is just each child now. I mean, and that's where you can really tell that this has gotten, this has just gotten so out of control, is that we have people now talking, and they're transgender, non-binary, male, sort of fluid, pansexual. I mean, these identities are getting more and more absurd. One of the things that I'm increasingly seeing among activists is a push towards accepting the concept that somebody can be more than one person. So we're, we're accepting
Ah.
the whole concept of dissociative identity disorder, that somebody can be more than one person at a time, and even a push by some to have separate birth certificates for each of those personas.
Isn't that a mental illness?
Well, it used to be, Maria.
Multiple personality disorder? Yeah.
And that's the problem, is that it's like I've heard, and I can't remember who coined this, but we're normalizing the pathological and we're pathologizing the normal, which is, again, when you're an adult and you go to a specific place and you do a role play, that could be so much fun. But basically what we've done is we've just said, okay, kids, go ahead and LARP. You get to dictate how people treat you. You get to dictate the rules. And if anybody crosses you, you now can call them haters and bigots, and cut yourself off from your, friends and family and parents. And it really is very sad. Again, I want to just talk about the difference between sort of the LARPing versus somebody who really is struggling from dissociative disorder. And that's what I had. I had that true identity difficulty where I wasn't pretending to be a boy. I had sort of cut myself off. I kind of think of it as splitting. I had become a different person and didn't acknowledge Erin. It was like, Erin, I'm not Erin. And it wasn't a role play. It was a mental health issue. It's a very well documented thing. And we have a video now about dissociative disorder I thought we could watch so that people really understand the difference between a kid who's, sort of assuming this identity as part of sort of a process of fitting in, of role playing, versus a kid who's really suffering from mental health issues.
Here are 5 signs you may be experiencing dissociation. Number 1, memory loss. Memory loss is a common symptom of dissociation. The main reason memory loss goes hand in hand with dissociation is because your brain cannot handle whatever is going on. Dissociation pulls you outside of your body. Hence, it's difficult for you to remember what happens around you if you're not there. Number 2, derealization. It sometimes feels like a dream where things are colorless, dull, or blurry. Number 3, feeling lightheaded. There are many reasons why you may feel lightheaded, but in the context of mental health, dissociation can be a cause. The vestibular system is a sensory system responsible for spatial awareness and sense of balance. However, when you dissociate, you are not aware of your surroundings. When you come to, the sudden realization of your surroundings serves almost as vestibular stimulation and makes you lightheaded. Number 4, not feeling pain. There is research suggesting that dissociation not only minimizes painful memories, but also the physical pain attached to them. And number 5, a loss of self-identity. Another aspect of dissociation is depersonalization. It's similar to derealization in the sense that you feel like you are watching yourself. However, depersonalization makes you feel distant from your mental process. You feel that you're an observer of your own life.
So I think that's really important to understand how profoundly difficult a dissociative disorder is. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up about, both a child with dissociative disorder as well as a child who's role playing, is that the more you engage in a certain type of behavior, the more you reinforce sort of those neural pathways. And so it's not, it even socially transitioning, as they call it, could potentially have some long-term consequences on that child and their brain development. We know that if somebody does something repetitively, that they're going to develop those neural pathways. And so if you have a kid who is, acting in certain ways, that's actually going to start to change their brain development, and probably not in a healthy way, again, because this is all about denying who that child really is and having them take on a false identity.
Yeah, that's interesting what you say about.
Can you hear my cat?
I can hear the kitty. She wants to be part of the video.
She wants to be part of the video.
That's all right. Don't worry about it. Well, you were talking about the different neural pathways, and I was remembering what you talked about when you practice something, when you do something over and over again. And I was remembering when I was learning to play the piano, there were certain chords that I could not get my hand to make the shape for the chord. And I remember getting so frustrated that I actually taped my fingers in the right position and just played that chord over and over and over again with my fingers taped in that position. And I think that's a lot what we're doing with these kids when we reinforce the social transitioning. We're kind of duct taping them or masking taping them into a certain position. And that is going to have an effect on them. The longer they do it, probably the more powerful the effect is.
Yeah, and I worry about that because we're giving them, it's problematic in a couple of ways. First of all, it's reinforcing the idea that you can be something that you're not, but it's also reinforcing the idea that the way that they're sort of pretending to be that something is actually the way that something really is. And I'm not sure if I made that very clear, but one of the things that I find incredibly offensive, and I'm hearing it more and more, is these men who, as you said, they grew up as male, and yet they're saying that they're women. And it's very offensive to me because they have no clue what it's like to be a woman. And even some of their behavior, I feel like, is just a tell. Like they're not acting like women would act.
No.
And I saw one video with Debbie Hayden, who decided to identify as a woman as an adult. And he was talking about the fact that, when he is alone at night in a dangerous area walking down the street, he can actually change how he walks so that he is perceived to be a male. And guess what? Women can't ever do that. Okay. There's no way I'm walking down the street and anybody would ever think I'm a guy.
Yeah, I saw a magazine cover with Martin Rothblatt, and said something about, being one of the few women CEOs in the country. This is a man.
Right.
And he's sitting there in his chair, leaning back with his legs spread. And I'm like, no woman sits that way. No woman ever sits that way.
Well, and there was recently a video in California where a store owner was challenging a man who was saying is a woman. And that man went outside and started yelling, trans women are women, trans women are women. And I'm like, no, you know what? No woman goes outside of a store and starts yelling, women are women. We don't have to, because we know what a woman is. The fact that he's doing that is just a clear indication that he's not a woman. And so again, it's dangerous for the child who's being accepted socially transitioning, but it's also so dangerous for the peers because we're propagating this lie. So Maria, do we have some suggestions for parents whose kids are wanting to socially transition? I think actually a lot of the very young children, it's actually the parents who are often pushing them to socially transition. But a lot of the teenagers, especially the rapid onset gender dysphoric teenagers, they will come home one day and they will be like, I am a boy, I want to socially transition. What kind of advice do we have for parents?
It's tough. It's really hard when that happens. By the time a child says, I'm transgender, I'm non-binary, or whatever, they've usually sort of have several weeks or months of planning it and kind of getting into it and getting their social structures supporting them around it. They can be very militant. I think the first thing you want to do is ask the child, hey, I need some time to think about this and learn about this. Can you be patient with me while I try to understand what's going on? And ask for a little bit of a buffer time. The child should be willing to give you that. And you can even say, I want to ask you lots of questions. I really want to understand where you're coming from. Please help me understand this. And I think that will help sort of demilitarize the child a little bit and give the child hope that the parent maybe will align with what the child wants, which is not what we encourage. But you're buying yourself some time by doing that. And then, if there's another parent in the situation, get with the other parent. You want to try to figure out what your strategy is going to be. It's best if all the adults who are around the child can kind of agree on what the strategy is going to be and set your boundaries. This is one of the things we talk about so often is figure out where your boundaries are. You may be fine with your child dressing a certain way, pick whatever clothes, pick whatever hairstyle you like, but I'm not going to call you the opposite sex pronouns. You're a boy, you were born a boy, and I'm not going to dishonor your boyness by calling you a girl.
Yeah.
That would be a place where I think you could start.
And I've talked to a lot of detransitioners who were rapid onset gender dysphoric kids, and they've all suggested that it's really important for parents not to buy into this, to be the ones who are, upholding reality, doing it in a loving and compassionate way, but just, setting that, somebody is there upholding reality. But I also wanted to address children like I was, who, I was a young child who one day, bam, went from being, fairly kind of quirky, but happy girl, to suddenly being a very angry and saying I'm a boy, being very aggressive. That's a kid who, something's happened. They need help. And so it's important for parents to be able to sort of identify, is this a child who's just role playing, or is this a child who's really developed an identity disorder and needs significant help? I can't imagine, what my life would have been like if I had not gotten the therapy that I so desperately needed to sort of resolve those underlying issues. There are some states now that therapists actually are not allowed to explore those underlying issues. And so parents have to be more creative. But if you have any suspicion, if your child is exhibiting those symptoms of disassociation, it's so important to get them some help, because, the kid who's dissociated isn't going to be able to help themselves. I was in such a state that, I didn't think anything was wrong with me. It was everybody else that wasn't, they were all wrong. If they would just accept me as a boy, everything was going to be just fine. And I had that firm conviction. And so those are kids who really need help to, address whatever it is that's causing that dissociative process.
Most of the people who are watching this video are probably parents who are already struggling with this. So what I'm about to say is not going to apply to you, unfortunately. But I would like to tell parents to be on the lookout for this with children. If you have children who have any sort of trauma, history of any sort of mental or psychological illness or disorder, we're seeing, autism, prior trauma, depression, self-harm, cutting. This really predisposes these kids to being vulnerable to this message, to this lie that they could be transgender. So I'd really like to encourage parents, be watching for that and kind of preemptively preventing it, keep them off social media. I think I can just say that blanket, just keep your kids off social media.
Yeah, I mean, it really reminds me of, some like a dungeon master who has suddenly been able to come into the schools and, we're no longer interested in who you really are. We want you to create a character, and we will all affirm that character, and you will be celebrated, and suddenly you will be a popular kid, and suddenly you'll be affirmed and given affection and attention in a way that you never had it before. So why don't you just come along and join our gang? That's really what it feels like. And so those kids who are struggling, who are a little bit on the edge, who aren't fitting in particularly well, those are the kids who are targeted.
And people might be asking, why is this happening? Why do you have these conspiracy theories about a dungeon master? Well, it's because it's very profitable. It's politically and financially profitable to push this. And it has been sold at every level of society as a civil rights issue, and it is not.
Oh, and the other thing is that we know that there are people who are akin to dungeon masters. We have paid employees of gender clinics who are going into schools and actively recruiting children. We have teachers who are required to take training about this. We have policies that are requiring the affirmation of kids who wanting to take on these identities. So it's not a conspiracy theory. It's right there, and anybody can go look and see it. You can go to Lurie Children's Hospital and see that they have employees that go into schools and actively recruit children. This is something that's happening. happening. It's so unfortunate, but it would be very much like somebody from the Society for Creative Anachronism going in and saying, you want to be a princess? You can be a princess, and we're going to make sure your teachers and, you know, everybody treats you like a princess because we know you really are a princess. We don't allow that to happen, and we shouldn't be allowing these recruiters to come into our schools, and we shouldn't be requiring policies that demand that teachers and other adults lie to children.
Yeah, we just had a teacher in a neighboring county over in Loudoun County quit in front of the school board because she will not lie about pronouns. She will not take any more of this training about how to reinforce LARPing, you know, and gender dysphoria.
Good for her.
Yeah.
So I
So
hope more teachers will take a stand on this, and parents really need to do it too. Again, once you start a child on that social transition, a lot of people say it's benign. You know, it's just a simple step. See how they feel. You know, it doesn't mean that they're going to go on the medical route. Well, actually, it likely does. Again, it's that slippery slope. It's actually, I think it's more of a cliff. You're pushing them off a cliff. And you're basically, you know, the cliff is reality and you're pushing them off it. So again, I would encourage parents to come to Partners for Ethical Care website. If you have any questions, we have resources there to help support you. We have some Facebook groups that you can come in if you need support as a parent. We know this is really difficult. And parents who might have gone along with the social transition, if you feel bad about it now, please don't beat yourself up about it, because you're being told, you're being lied to by professionals, suggesting that this is, you know, just an innocuous thing to do. Go ahead, just let them socially transition. I think a lot of parents do this because they're pressured into it. And then they realize once a child's gone down that road, it's really hard to set them on a different path.
it's not too late. You can change course. You can sit down with your child and say, you know, I've been affirming this. I've been going along with this, and I'm realizing that I don't think I made the right decision. I don't think this is what's best for you or what's healthy for you. And I need to change the way I'm responding to this. And you can do that.
And that's a very valid thing. There's been lots of times as a parent where I've approached my child and said, you know, I've rethought this, and, you know, I've realized that maybe I wasn't making the best choice involving this. And that's okay to do as a parent.
I've had to do that with my kids on other issues as well. And one I'm thinking of, my youngest daughter experienced bullying at school, and I got on top of it. I went in, I volunteered in the classroom, I moved her classrooms. Well, my oldest son came to me later and he said, I was bullied in 4th grade too. And you didn't do that for me. You didn't come in. And I said, I'm so sorry. I said, I should have. I said, I didn't take it seriously. I didn't understand how bad it was. I was not the parent that you needed. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I didn't. But, you know, we make mistakes, we learn, we grow, we change, and it's perfectly reasonable and valid to admit when you've been wrong and you need to make a change.
Well, thank you, Maria. I hope that this has been helpful to parents.
Thank you, Erin. I always enjoy hearing your insights on this, and we'll look forward to talking next time.
All right, thanks.
We are not doctors or therapists. We are not giving medical or psychiatric advice, and we offer no guarantee of outcomes. We simply want to talk about how to support and love kids using long understood best practices from the fields of psychology, education, and child development. We're glad you joined in our conversation today, and we hope that you